welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Page. I am one of your hosts today, Jen, and I am joined by my illustrious colleague and boss, too. Like, introduce yourself.
I guess, is that what you say? I'm illustrious? Because
Yes.
well, hello, I am Jessica. I am another one of the hosts here at Turn the Page, Syosset Library. Welcome.
We have a great guest today, the author of a fantastic little magical, realist, romance, fantasy, witchy, wonderful, just lots of really cool stuff going on. So could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Of course, I am so excited to be here. My name is Raquel Vasquez Gilliland, and my book it's my adult romance debut, and I'm so excited about it because I've been reading romance nonstop pretty much for the last 7 years. It's called Witch of Wild Things, and it's about a protagonist. Her name is Sage Flores, and she's returning home after being away for a really long time because of family drama and trauma. And she is paired up to work with a man named Tennessee Reyes, and he also broke her heart in high school, and he doesn't actually know he did that. So there's a lot of tension because he's still an amazing person, and she's trying really hard not to fall in love with him. And I won't spoil it, but she fails. But so it's just, yeah, it's a book about sisters and ghosts and curses, and the natural world and things like that. So I hope that was good, a good summary. I didn't want to read like the whole back of the book. So.
No, that's great. Fantastic. I would love if you could start off by talking a little bit about, where the book came from. I don't usually like to ask about where ideas come from because it's not like a very good question, but like, was there an inception point for you with this book that was like an image or a character or a line of dialogue? Where did the journey kind of start for you?
So this book, I started writing it like at the first year of the pandemic. And it was like a totally different book, totally different characters. Sage's name wasn't even Sage. She was not a plant hunter. She worked as an assistant to an architect. And like I said, the entire book is completely different now. And I really struggle with it. I think because the pandemic made me so stressed out. And when I'm stressed out, I have a hard time creating and focusing. So I worked on this book for about 15 months, and I want to say all told, with the writing and deleting, revising and deleting, it was like 150,000 words. And then at some point I realized none of it was really working, and I deleted the whole thing and started over from the first line. Now, I had picked up a manuscript that I wrote years ago about a young woman who is haunted by her sister. And I kept getting this image of a ghost sister leaving gifts. And I don't even know how the first line came to me, which I'll read it. I don't trust myself to remember it word for word. This is the first line. My great aunt Nadia says it's a bad idea to reject a gift from a ghost. And that just came to me so like whole. And so when I sat down and rewrote the book, it took me, this is going to make publishing sound really easy, and it just isn't, but it just worked out well for me. It took me about a month and a half to write the book. It didn't need any revising, and to get sold to Berkeley because about a month later it was sold to Berkeley. I have revised it since, but usually I have a lot more work to do between my agent reading it and submitting it. But so it's like all that work and struggle really paid off in the end. So, yeah.
First of all, the rhythm of that line in general is just sort of magical in itself. When you write, because when you read in a certain rhythm and, you have like a book that feels as magical as this one, do lines like that just sort of pop up in your mind as you're writing it? Like, it sounds like once the seeds were planted, pun intended, the magic just kind of started to grow. And I don't want to say the book wrote itself, but it seems like, in a way, it just sort of grew like a garden of words, for lack of a better phrase.
Well, I did spend that summer before I wrote it in the fall reading some craft books and doing outline and character. I forget what they call it, but when you write name, birth date, like character outlines, I guess. So I did spend time working on the bones of the book in that way. But when I wrote it, it did flow. Like I would sit down and look up, and it was like evening time, and it just felt like no time had passed. Somehow I had gotten 3,000 words in it, and it just didn't feel like it. And I would say a lot of that, the rhythmic lyrical writing does come naturally for me, but I credit that to a master's of fine arts and poetry, which I got at the University of Alaska. I read nothing but poetry for 4 years straight. And so, so it's like in my body and in my bones right now. And it's actually really helpful because I do mentor unpublished writers between books. It's helpful for when I give notes, because I'm like, okay, it's almost like a feeling at this point when I'm reading a sentence. There needs to be a little something there, or a little something added, or one more word, or one more something.
I really I fell in love with Sage very quickly as the book started. She's a really wonderful character, and she's very complex. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit maybe about like where she came from, and sort of like the dynamic with Tennessee, because I'm always really interested when I talk to romance writers, like how you sort of like how the personalities balance or don't balance each other sometimes, and how the kind of push and pull between like what's bringing them together and what is sort of preventing that from happening, like how you orchestrate all that. It's a big question. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. So you want to know how Sage was developed and how the relationship was developed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Sage, I don't remember. I don't remember a lot of her development. I remember working on it a lot. I don't remember specifically where it came from. I know I wanted to, this is my first adult book, and I wanted to write a character who was approximately my age. I'm still older than her, and I was trying to just get into the mindset of adult problems versus young adult problems, which is where I've been published prior. And there's some overlap, but because adulting is, even once you're an adult, you still feel like you don't know what you're doing a lot of the time. But I think the main difference is I wanted to get to know her through a more of a history of her trauma. And because I feel like the things that guide us and the things that repel us from certain life experiences are the ones that are touching on our unhealed wounds. And so that's actually what I look at with Tennessee too, is what are his unhealed wounds? What are her unhealed wounds, emotional wounds, and how are they going to clash, and how are they going to attract based on their previous trauma? And I think that answers it. Oh, I also listened to songs from the 90s and early 2000s about unrequited love, because I just feel like that was my entire relationship status when I came of age, was completely unrequited love. I never really had a boyfriend till I was older, and I was always very socially awkward and kind of outcast. And so I just felt like I had all this affection and love for guys that I had crushes on, but it was like ignored or not even noticed. And so that's a lot of where the AOL Instant Messenger came from too, as personal experience. So
I'm just the fact. So you actually jumped into my next question. I wanted to talk about the whole presence of AOL Instant Messenger from the flashbacks, because it definitely made it feel very real. Just kind of remembering how prominent that was as a point of communication back then. Was that fun for you to write?
Yeah, it was so fun because there, as much as we've developed a sort of online language now with, I'm trying to think of examples. Well, emoji, we didn't really have those like we do now back then. So we had the emoticons, I guess, where you put the like text symbols together to make winky faces and stuff. So, and each one had just a different meaning than what we use today. And I remember I always loved doing the clown one where you put the O for the nose, and and just going back and those all those little shortened phrases like BRB for be right back, or TTYL for talk to you later. Like all those phrases really came from then, and it was a lot of fun to revisit that because I hadn't really thought about that original sort of texting in a really long time. And yeah, it was so fun because I was actually just talking to my sister about it. We would used to sneak onto the family desktop at night so that people wouldn't be reading over our shoulder, and just like try to type really quietly because the keyboards back then were so loud. So our parents would wake up and then talk to boys online, sometimes anonymously because they gave you more attention if they didn't know who you were, at least me. And so yeah, it was really fun to remember that. It was a kind of a magical time.
I think that really touches on, I think, why I connected with her so quickly is that, like, at that age, I really felt that same way of like the twins sort of like being desperate to connect and also terrified to connect, and how like instant messenger sort of like was a safe space to do that, for like a sort of like thing that mediated between you and like maybe the real world in a way that felt a little bit safer. And that, yeah, that just felt like it really resonated with like my memories of that time too.
Yeah, that's like a perfect way to put it. It was safe. And because in real life, rejection was like devastating. But if somebody said or I gotta go, G2G, and then left, it was like, okay. So yeah, I get that too. I feel that.
Fun personal snippet. I had no idea what LOL meant for a while, and I thought it was an insult. I thought it meant loser online.
That's so funny.
So I'd be like, oh, my joke was really bad. It is very funny now how people just sort of like online communication is just so natural like that. But I remember being at that forefront and just trying to like figure out what those things meant, and am I being insulted or is this a good thing? But kind of getting back to like the magic in the book, I love that Sage is like a plant whisperer in a way, that plants are sort of her connection to magic. So are you a plant person? Do you feel an affinity for them yourself?
Oh yeah, I've always loved plants. They're a lot less complicated than humans, so that's been helpful for them. And I also have grown up like from a lineage of women who are I've always seemed like plant whisperers to me. And I've actually a couple years ago, maybe when I was writing this book, I started looking into and educating myself on decolonizing the way I view landscaping and gardening. And now I teach classes on occasion on it. And so basically, one of the first things I teach people when I teach classes on decolonizing the garden or landscaping is that plants are alive and the land is alive, and the plants have spirits and the land is full of spirits. And so yeah, that's directly from me trying to go back unlearn things that like the colonizers taught my ancestors. So
that is super interesting to me. And while prepping for this interview after reading the book, I read an essay that you wrote that was "You Do Not Have to Explain Your Magic." And you talked about how that affects like your world building and also about like decolonizing. Yeah, could you talk a little bit about like how those ideas maybe affected like how you present the magic system in this book?
oh yeah, and it's really directly from my family because I don't know if I wrote that. I try to remember that specific essay because I've actually written. I've been asked to write a lot about this since I wrote that one,
Mm.
and it's so when a storm comes and my mom doesn't want it to rain, she'll go and cut it out with a knife, and so like all those rituals and beliefs. If I was like, hey mom, why do you do that? Like, where does it come from? Who told you to do that? And she'd be like, well, I don't know. It's just something we do. And so I actually went to my undergraduate degrees in cultural anthropology because I really wanted to understand where some of these rituals came from. And they're, for the most part, they're pre-Columbian.
Mm.
And a lot of them are shamanic, although shaman isn't quite the right word to use, but that's what anthropologists use.
Mm.
And but we don't know where they came from. We don't know which gods or goddesses or non-binary deities that are connected to these rituals. And those are things that like I don't see how I could ever recover that knowledge. And so at a certain point I realized that I can't explain my family's magic. I can't or what people consider magic. And I realized that I've been writing books that kind of were inspired by this revelation even before I had it. And in Witch of Wild Things, there's a certain point she's musing on the curse in her family that she and her sisters have been born with gifts like controlling the weather, and she has no idea where they came from. They're like, maybe it's from this or that, and we just don't know. And that's okay. It's okay to not know. And a lot of times when you're writing magical realism or fantasy, the first thing they'll tell you in like writing guides is establish your magical system and like in super great detail. And that just didn't ring it didn't ring or it didn't resonate with me because I grew up with what people would call magic, and we can't explain any of it. We don't know the rules, it feels like half the time, or even most of the time. So that's where that came from. And that's how I show it in this book in particular.
Very cool. So another thing I really liked about how magic was portrayed here is about how, or it's like, the magic sometimes like acts to sort of like externalize like the inner state of a character. And like, it's informed by their experiences and their trauma and sort of like, do you see that like, or like, was that something that you were also thinking about, was like how magic also communicates like emotion and I guess like connections with other people and stuff like that? I hope I phrased that okay. That was a weird question.
No, it's a really cool question. I don't think I've been asked that one before, so now I've got to think about it for a second. I just finished Teal's book. So Sage is the elder sister, Teal is the next eldest. And I think it comes through more obviously with her gift, which is the ability to control the weather, but she can't control it. Her emotions control the weather, and she has a really hard time controlling her emotions. And so that was actually really interesting for me to write because on one hand, we writers, when we're writing character arcs, we have to look at the layers of the emotional development and show them in ways sometimes the reader knows more what the character is feeling than what the character knows that they're feeling. And this way, in this book, Teal could just look outside and see what she's really feeling, even if she's not quite sure. And so that was just really interesting to explore. Like, she's like, I don't really know how I feel about that. Let me go look out the window and find out. So other than that, I don't really know. I would have to think about it a little more to answer the question about how magic might show the emotion of the characters.
I love just the whole sister relationship dynamic. It was done so well here. I think there is a thirst for that, just sort of in general. I mean, I know for a really long time, sister relationships, I feel like we're kind of always portrayed with more animosity than, you know, I guess complexity. I mean, I guess there's always complexity in it, but there's sort of always this trope of, I don't want to say the wicked stepsisters, because a lot of time they're not stepsisters, but especially in these books where the sisters are just pitted against each other, and one is sort of pure and good and the others are not. And I think that there is a need for this. You see it in, like, when you talk about like fairy tales in general, like throughout Disney, you have now Elsa and Anna, and then even with Encanto, there's the Madrigals. But I mean, going back to it, like I think one of my first favorite sister relationships portrayed in cartoons or fantasy was Nani and Lilo and Stitch. Like, you can be at each other's throats one minute, but it's a nuanced relationship and you love each other. And I think that, there's a lot of really nice building blocks here between Sage and her sisters, one of which is a ghost, not of this world anymore. You had mentioned before that you are a sister, correct?
Mhm.
So what was some of, did you use a lot of your relationship for that, or maybe just observation, or just sort of what you wished you've sort of seen more in literature of sisterly relationships?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, your point where the sisters are either pitted against each other and there's one like really bad one, or they're all bad except for the protagonist, or it's like a super sweet friendship without any adversity. I've seen that one a lot too. And so yeah, I this wasn't like completely specifically based on my relationship with me and my sister growing up, but I did pull a lot of tension, I think, just because my sister and I had to share our room our entire lives, even until she went to college. And that was really hard because it wasn't a big room, and we had different like cleaning styles, different organization styles, and we just used to have just huge, enormous fights growing up about that were really about our frustration with not having our own space. And I guess maybe I wrote this huge house as a wish, of how I wish we could have each had our own room. But yeah, there's just something about, like, I think deep and close sisterhood is enraging at times, and it's also, like you said, in the next hour you guys are over it because it's like expressed, the attention is expressed, and you guys are back to painting each other's toenails and listening to the Backstreet Boys and bonding over them. So so yeah, you definitely can see where I was inspired by my relationship with my sister growing up.
Well, this has been absolutely lovely. Thank you so much for not only coming to talk to us, but for writing this book. It was really just a delight. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for this interview. I loved all your questions. And
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, listeners, you're going to want to pick up Witch of Wild Things. When you hear this, it will be available. So please go to your favorite library or independent bookstore, wherever you like to get your books, and pick it up. I don't think you'll regret it. Thank you very much for joining us, and it is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.